Committee on Tuesday, the 25th of February, from the Walton Street, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Johnny Morris, Chairperson of the committee. This meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Can I remind members to use their microphones, and can everyone ensure mobile phones are on silent? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Turning to item 1 on the agenda, we have apologies from the Vice Chair, Chris Chamberlain. So we'd need to, I'd like to appoint a new Vice Chair. Do you have any nominations? Councillor Godfrey.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Power.
What a good choice. Do you have any seconders for that nomination? We have 2. Okay, if Councillor Power would like to become my Vice Chair, thank you. Moving to item 2, disclosures of interest. Do we have any declarations from members of the committee? I see nothing. Let's move on. Chair's announcements. I have no particular announcements apart to apologise for my particularly strange voice this evening. I've had a cold. Item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I ask if these are agreed as a correct record?
Agreed.
Agreed, fantastic. Item 5, public participation. There's no public participation, which gets us straight on to item number 6, which is the audit results report 2023-24, which Simon Mathers from Ernst & Young is going to introduce to us. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So the report that you have in front of you, which I will take as read, is our 23-24 audit results report. And this reflects the culmination of our work in the 23-24 year and sets out our findings on both the financial statements audit and our work on value for money arrangements. In terms of the broader context for the report, it builds very much on the verbal update that I gave to the September meeting of the committee last year and the debate that we had, and then the 22-23 audit completion report that was presented in November by my colleague Kevin Souter. So it's very much framed by the context of the measures to reset local government audit and catch up the backlog. So, as made clear in both of those presentations, we intend to issue a disclaimer of opinion on the financial statements for 23-24. That's solely because of the disclaimer that we issued in the 22-23 year, and issuing a disclaimer in those circumstances is consistent with guidance that's been published by both the National Audit Office and the Financial Reporting Council. So the impact of the prior year disclaimer means we don't have assurance on prior year comparatives in the current year accounts, in-year movements, and then some closing balances in the current year accounts. Those things in combination are so pervasive that we need to disclaim again. We've also not been able to fully complete our work on the valuation of property and plant and equipment assets carried at existing use value and fair value, and investment property which is carried at fair value. That was because of weaknesses in the quality of evidence provided and the assumptions made by the council's external valuer. We've raised an associated control recommendation for improvement in relation to that in section 6 of the report. Together with a further recommendation to fully review fully depreciated assets to determine whether they still exist. Both of those recommendations have been accepted by management. All of that said, and in the context of the disclaimer, we have completed a very significant proportion of what we would usually complete in a normal audit year. And I think the committee can take some comfort from the fact that the council's accounts have been subject to a very thorough audit this year. If you turn to page 45 of your papers, Appendix A of the report, we've set out a summary of assurances gained, and by major area in the accounts we say whether we've got full assurance, whether we've got partial assurance, or whether we have no assurance. So that's quite a useful visual in terms of being able to assess the amount of work that's been done and the assurance that you have. On the financial statements, in terms of our other risks and areas of audit focus. There are only a couple of matters that I want to draw to your attention. So a £5 million reduction was made in the value of the IAS 19 pensions liability on the balance sheet. That was connected to incorrect demographic and inflation assumptions used by the pension fund actuary in producing the council's IAS 19 liability. That issue was not specific to Winchester. There is a similar error across all scheduled body audits in Hampshire. The second amendment that I'd want to draw to your attention was a £10 million decrease in the carrying value of council dwellings on the balance sheet. That was caused by a failure to apply a deflator to the existing use value that reflects the assets are social housing rather than open market private sector housing. Although those changes are material, neither change impacts the bottom line, reported financial performance, or the level of usable reserves that are held by the council. We've also completed our work on value for money, and our findings and conclusions are set out on page 28. We identified one significant weakness in the council's arrangements. That was around the recent review of compliance with legal and regulatory requirements for all HRA properties that was reported to Cabinet in February. The review concluded two things. So it concluded that the council does not have an effective assurance framework or risk management to ensure it's meeting legal and regulatory requirements in relation to its HRA properties. It also highlighted issues with how data is held. So data is held across multiple systems and in different places, which makes it difficult to have one version of the truth. We've therefore concluded that there is an actual significant weakness in governance arrangements, and that impacts two VFM sub-criteria that we've set out in the audit results report. Our audit report will be modified to report by exception on those matters. That's all I really wanted to say in terms of introducing the report, but the final thing is to say thank you to the council's finance team who've been very helpful and worked with us and allowed us to deliver this much of the audit this time. So we just extend our gratitude to Mrs. Keys, Mr. Aldridge and the wider team. And I'll stop there and take questions.
Thank you, Simon. Do you have any questions from councillors? Councillor Godfrey.
The disclaimed opinion that you're going to give for 23-24 continues this farce of an audit process where we are not getting what we're paying for. How long will these disclaimed reports continue when the information has been presented to the auditors, but the auditors have failed to deliver the complete process and not be subject of the audit?
So probably two things that I'd put out of that to address. So in terms of how long will it carry on for? So there was a need to issue the disclaimers to reset to make audit timely, and I think it's important that the audit is timely. Getting assurance over financial information that is years old, I don't think it is helpful. In terms of when will the disclaimers unwind, so there are, if you look at the NAO guidance, it's freely available on its website. We could get back to a position potentially of issuing an unmodified opinion by the financial year 26-27. So there will be another disclaimer next year, a limitation of scope the following year, potentially getting back to an unmodified audit report by 26-27. In terms of getting what the council has paid for, I would reiterate that we have undertaken virtually a full programme of work. So the reason that we are issuing a disclaimer this year is solely as a result of the prior year disclaimer, as at the start of my presentation.
Response?
I'm grateful for a response and a clarification of particularly the second point. It would be useful. We have had this last few months criticism from the public for producing financial reports which do not have a clear audit record because of these disclaimers. And it would be really useful to, if that could be made clear, that this is as a result of the backlog and trying to solve that, rather than any shortcomings in the bookkeeping or finances of the authority.
Someone else to respond?
I think the council could usefully refer the public to publicly available guidance from both the Financial Reporting Council and the National Audit Office that is very clear that it does take that long for a disclaimer to unwind, and that is purely as a result of issuing the prior year disclaimer.
Thank you. Councillor Power?
Do we not feel that the explanation of the backstop and the effect it has had on page 12 of the audit report, that should not be given more prominence, so that it's as prominent as the red and orange flags that we have on pages 46 and 45 and 46?
So just to clarify, is that page 12 of the papers or page 12 of our?
Page 12 of the papers, which explains backstop. Thank you.
I hope that it's right at the very front of the report. Would be one of the first things that's read. I hope that it does give sufficient prominence. It certainly articulates why we have been able to not been unable to issue a clean opinion in the 23-24 year.
Councillor Pillinger?
Can I ask Ms. Keys if she's happy with the qualified report?
Yes, you can ask that question, of course. Yes, Simon and I worked long and hard to make sure that this audit report, I think, reflected both Simon's stance and mine for the council's stance of the cause of the disclaimed audit opinion. And I think we got to a point where we were happy, both sides, that it was a fair reflection of both of, and I can confirm it was very detailed audit work undertaken by the team this year, a full schedule of work. Obviously it's disappointing to have a disclaimed audit opinion, but we don't stand alone in that. I think it's genuinely not a reflection of Winchester City Council's financial position. It's as a result of the audit regime nationally.
And do you feel that the opinions expressed make that clear enough?
It's difficult to say because I'm not used to having an audit opinion which is disclaimed, but I think for someone with knowledge of local government audit, then this makes it clear that it was not as a result of failings at the council, but more to do with the wider audit regime.
And would you like to see a separate opinion, even if it's taken from the statements within this, that make that absolutely clear for the non-accountant?
I think it might be useful for the council to provide some commentary alongside the audit report this year, and I would be happy to work with Mr. Mathers to ensure that whatever we say in that is consistent with the auditor's report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it's my turn now. You've identified a significant weakness in the value for money arrangements regarding the assurance framework and risk management framework of housing stock and the computer record. What should the council do to eliminate that significant weakness?
Understanding is that the council has drawn up an action plan on the back of the findings of the report that was presented to Cabinet this month, I believe. I think it's going to be really important that the council delivers against that action plan, and I think that will be the focus of our value for money work in 24-25.
Councillor Cutler?
Yeah, I think if I understand it correctly, this is the result of the of having to work with the housing regulator now, and where the housing team self-referred to have, or actually had an analysis of what might happen if they were inspected to make sure that they'd be in the correct position to provide the value for money assurance. And of course, because of the changing rules, the advice was that there was work to do. The auditors have found exactly the same thing. So it's not something that the EY have uncovered. It is something that we were already aware of as a council and taking action on. But the result, of course, is that it can't, it has to be in the audit report, because that's the facts on the ground are that at the moment we cannot provide that assurance.
Thank you. Any more questions from councillors? Councillor Camoyson.
Thank you, Chair. I asked to be put into Pariah's corner because, like you, I have a cold and I thought I'd minimise. But so hopefully you will see my hand go up in the future. I've got a question around, you draw our attention to Appendix A, and that's the classic traffic light system, where, you know, it's really trying to summarise things down visually to say, which normal interpretation would say green is good, amber is okay, some reservations, and red is bad. Now, and this kind of relates to communications, and, you know, a cursory glance at this says we've got some problems. And you know, I found it tough as a layperson who's not used to accounting anyway, let alone, you know, public accounting, going through all this and trying to tease it out. And I just sort of wonder if the traffic light system doesn't help there, because it creates the impression that we, the City Council, have got some serious problems, when actually, if I look really carefully, I see this column title is assurance rating. And if I understood what that meant, which I now think I'm roughly in the right ballpark, I think, yeah, okay, it's not that we've got a problem necessarily, it's just the assurance isn't there. And in a way, what I'm highlighting is that the traffic light system here doesn't distinguish between we haven't got the assurance versus we have a problem. And there's two distinctively different things. Hopefully we haven't got any reds in terms of real problems. We might have actually we may have a red, bearing in mind what you just said about HRA. But I just wonder if there's a way of, if it's allowed within the standards, to at least distinguish this so that we're able to show traffic lights for, okay, here's where we've got real problems that we know about. Yeah, we haven't quite finished the job on some of these other areas. Is that possible?
I think it's helpful feedback, thank you, and I completely appreciate the point being made. So you're quite right, this is not, you know, you have an issue with this particular area. In the main, we've not got assurance in a particular area because we can't, because of the impact of the prior year disclaimer. So, for example, reserves, which are red on there, we cannot give you assurance on reserves because that's the last part of the balance sheet that will be built back in the process. So you are right, it is more nuanced than that. I think inevitably it's difficult for a layperson to understand however you present it. I think it's tricky to understand that, but I take the point and it's something we can reflect on going forward, certainly.
Councillor Cutler.
Well, I might have a suggestion in that the problem is it looks like a risk register where a red risk is you know, is a flag, but with the risk register we will always put an explainer of what it means at the top, and I think that might be, you know, this is what these three mean, an explanation of them in the report. Whether you use different colours is another option, but to just explain that it's because the work hasn't been done effectively.
Again, happy to take that on board. I do think that the narrative that goes against each of the rows in the table does a bit of that explanation. But visually, I can see how you may form that impression. But hopefully, the narrative does explain. So, if you were to look at, for example, narrative on cash flow statement, we're very clear that we don't have assurance over movements because of the prior year disclaimer. Therefore, we can't give you assurance on the cash flow statement. The only areas where we didn't complete our planned programme of work, as I said in the presentation, were property, plant and equipment and investment property. And we would have done there had we not have run out of time running up against the backstop date.
Okay, my turn again. On page 43, it's the various fees which we pay, which I acknowledge that are negotiated by FRC, and so they're out of our hands necessarily, and now it's out of Ernst & Young's hands. Can I just, for my own sort of peace of mind, be sure that the fees stated are per year of work and not per audit delivered, bearing in mind that the last audit only was 4 months of Ernst & Young's time, and you expect to have, if we use a third of your list time, to pay a third less in terms of the fee. Is that correct?
So the fees are shown by audit year. We did less work in the prior year in 22-23 because we moved straight to disclaim. So you would expect that to be reflected in the fee that is charged. Yes, you're right. It's public sector audit appointments that determine the fee and not us, the scale fee.
So can I just be clear that the fee of 157,826 is for this audit report, or is it the fee for per year as the ongoing charge?
So for this report, I mean, the fees, so the fees are published by the PSAA for the council. The PSAA sets a scale fee. It does that for all bodies within the National Framework Contract. It publishes those scale fees on its website. That is the fee for the 23-24 year that's published on the PSA website. So for the work that's done in this report.
Okay, so sorry to sort of, just for my peace of mind, so that the next audit you deliver will be, you'll have, I think, a whole year to work on that. Should we expect the same fee, or a considerably larger one, considering you spend more time on it?
So the currently 23-24 fee is the full fee. It will be the scale fee in 24-25, I believe, is the same or similar under the contract. It is set for the next 5-year period, published on PSAA's website. They do make changes over time, dependent on feedback. But yes, that is the fee for the year. You would expect next year's fee to be similar.
Thank you.
Just in case it helps the committee, for a bit of context, you may remember I brought a report around the new contracts with auditors that were let through PSAA. So this is the first year of the new contract, and the fees leapt up considerably. It was 151% increase across the board for all authorities who opted into the scheme for the procurement of audit through PSAA. So that's why there's such a marked increase between the prior year's fees under the old contract and the new fees for the current year. This is the first year of that new contract.
Thank you. It's clarifying rather than reassuring, I think, is the best term. Any more questions from members of the committee? Councillor Cromwell.
Yeah, so on the timetable I mean, I'm sure this situation is hugely frustrating for anyone in your position who's going to councils around the country and having to explain all this stuff, and it does distract from actually what may well be very well run council and a job that's been done well. So I've got a lot of empathy for that position, but you know, as a audit and governance committee, you know, we're lay people, we're elected, we potentially change every year. So each one, I mean, I'm learning this year about this. Others who may have been on the committee longer may well have heard the backstory before and be more accepting of it. You know, to me, and it sounds like this is going to run out. We're going to get ourselves out of this situation at roughly the point where this council gets abolished by the LGR and effectively subsumed into some unitary thing. So we've got this problem all the way through the rest of our time here. And it kind of like, I mean, I'm not so much asking a question here. I suppose I'm having a bit of a debate here. Is it feels like I've taken my car in to have a big job done, and I've gone and collected it, and they've kind of done the job, but they haven't fitted all the ancillary stuffs, you know, and put the engine back into work, and are leaving me to do that job. So I'm having to stretch in terms of interpret what I'm seeing here to get the assurance, whereas really I just want to look at the traffic lights and see lots of green. So I sort of feel like I have to vent that frustration a little bit, even though I'm not asking a question, but have to vent it. All right.
Would you like to respond to that discussion?
I can empathise with all of that. I think they're entirely reasonable comments. I don't think anybody would say that this is a satisfactory situation and it's a fairly drastic measure to reset the system. The local government reorganisation dynamic adds something else to it. I do agree. And we've talked about it before at the committee, but changes need to be made to prevent a reoccurrence of this. So the financial reporting framework in government is extremely complicated. If you look at the set of local government accounts, they're twice the size of an equivalent corporate set of accounts. There are some requirements within the framework. For example, I think we've talked about this before, the need to revalue operational property, plant and equipment, for example, that consume an awful lot of time for both preparers and auditors. There are issues around the attractiveness of the audit profession. There are issues around levels of recruitment within local government finance teams. I'm not saying here, but more broadly, that have led to this situation. Those things need to change to prevent a reoccurrence going forward. So I share the points.
Okay, if we have no further questions, do any of the councillors wish to follow Councillor Moyson's example and debate? We have the recommendations, which is to consider the matters in the report and for me to sign the letter of representation. So do the councillors have any views on whether I should sign it or not? I'm minded to approve it. Would you agree with that?
I would agree.
Agree.
Agree. Thank you very much. Thank you, Simon Mathis, for coming to speak to us and for your audit results report. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 7 on the agenda. It's the annual financial report. Liz Keys to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So hot on the heels of EY's audit report showing the findings of the work that they've done, you now have before you the annual financial report, which includes the financial statements for the council that have been scrutinised in great detail by Mr. Mather's team. Members may well remember that back in October, we led a briefing and a training session on understanding the financial statements. So with the exception of the changes that are set out in the report, these largely reflect the financial statements that were used for that training session. So you've seen the draft financial statements, and these are the ones following the audit work.
Thank you. I found this report particularly fascinating because it actually gives you a really good guide to everything the council does and things like exactly how many council houses we own and what sort of type they are. Anyway, councillors, any questions on the financial report? Councillor Godfrey.
I think the key question is to ask Ms. Keys to confirm that she is content that the statement represents a fair and reasonable picture of the council's finances as best she can tell.
Of course, yes, I have today re-signed the financial statements to give assurance to committee that they give a true and fair view of the financial position of the council as at the 31st of March last year.
Thank you. Any other questions, or shall I have a go? Can I ask regarding the rent arrears area on page, I think it's 150? H6, yes. We have a provision for bad debts of about 2/3 of the total. Can I inquire about why we have this as a policy, and are we expecting that money to be written off or to be collected?
Certainly. So the accounting policy is that we have adequate provisions and we only account for income that we think we will genuinely receive. So we have provisions for bad debts or allowances for doubtful debts across many different areas of debt recovery in the council. And this note here, H6 on page 150, specifically refers to rent arrears. This calculation is split into two elements, arrears in respect of former tenants within the HRA and those which relate to current tenants within the HRA. And this is a risk-based assessment of the recoverability of those rents from those two different groups of people. So the proportions used are consistent with other HRAs in other organisations and the experience that Winchester District has of being able to recover those debts. But we do review all of the provision calculations annually, and this is no exception.
Thank you, that clears it up for me. Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Camoyson.
I'm going to apologise to Mrs. Keys for not informing you beforehand I was going to ask this question, because I only came to me about 5 o'clock today. In a table, I think it's on page 95, there are 2 items in there labelled Homes for All. One's a general fund and one's an HRA fund, and there's substantial millions in each. And I'm just a little bit unclear of why we have Homes for All in the general fund and it's not all in the HRA. So it's just a point of clarification. You look like you know the answer.
Yes, so the Homes for All Council Priority covers all of our housing services. Some of those housing services are delivered through the HRA, and it's about looking after tenants within our council homes. But part of it is also to do with, for instance, homelessness prevention services, which are actually a general fund service. So we split those out within this comprehensive income and expenditure statement to try and make it clearer of the split between the two funds. But I can see that makes it more complicated to understand why we might have 2 lines for Homes for All. But it's because some homelessness services, for instance, are within the general fund, but looking after all tenants and council properties, council homes, falls within the HRA.
So if I could follow that up, you mentioned homelessness. Is that the only thing in there, or are there other some big numbers, factors which account for a big number in there? Was that, because those are big numbers, 13.8 million is a lot of money. So is it just homelessness, or is it something else as well?
There are various services that I don't know off the top of my head. Homelessness prevention is a big one, but also looking after our leaseholder tenants within properties as well. So non-HRA tenants that have performed the right to buy, for instance, looking after service charges, etc., for those properties as well.
Any other questions from councillors? I'm not seeing any hands up. I would just throw it open to debate then from councillors. I would just say that I'm particularly reassured that on page 106 that the council is given a clean bill of health as the going concern, and express my shock and disappointment that our painting of Charles II has depreciated in value by about £150,000. I can't possibly account for it. I assume he's not as popular as he used to be. Any other comments from councillors? Councillor Cormoiston.
I'll just endorse your comment early on that actually these accounts we all probably all, including me, ought to spend more time looking through them, because I think they do give a lot of insight into what's actually going on. Though occasionally you need to ask a question to qualify what it actually means, but there's a huge amount of info behind the numbers. So I'm a big fan of looking through the numbers and following the money, as it were. So these look good to me. Thank you.
Thank you. The recommendations on this item are that we approve the statement of accounts, and that I subsequently sign the statement of responsibilities. Are we agreed on both those points?
Agreed.
Great.
Thank you. Then we can move on to section number 8 on the agenda, which is the planning for the audit of the 24-25 accounts. Liz Keys to introduce. Okay.
Yep. So I'm the senior technical accountant in Liz's team. She's asked me to talk about this one. So yeah, so no sooner have we finished 23-24, we've got to talk about 24-25, and this is the start of the process. We've got the auditors in already, I might add, and they're already starting on that. So hopefully they may finish this time. We never know. And in this report, it's really to mention or introduce you to IFRS 16, which is a new standard on leases. And we don't always put this report to committee if there's nothing to say, but we thought this year, actually IFRS 16 potentially could be a big thing, and it certainly is in some authorities. So we thought we'd actually introduce it to you and tell you that we've got to make changes because of it. So I will try and outline some of that. Before, when we did leases, there were two types. There were finance leases and there were operating leases. Now, operating leases can be thought of as things that go through the revenue account. Really, you see the you see some things in the disclosures, but in terms of the payments, it's just an expense through the revenue account. Finance leases, another type. These are treated as capital transactions. Now, what this new standard has done is basically for arrangements where we are the lessee, they've taken away that distinction. It's now everything is treated as one type of lease, like the capital leases or finance leases. I'm calling them capital leases, but finance leases which are treated as capital transactions. And what that means, and what that will mean in our accounts is, whereas before we had some operating leases, you didn't really see those in the balance sheet. Now they have to turn into finance leases, and you do see them in the balance sheet, albeit here at the council we don't have a lot. So we have some vehicles, some lease vehicles. We have a very few properties, and we also have the refuge vehicles, which actually already disclosed in that way. There is also the standards also brought in something else, another complication, as you were, to do with peppercorn leases. Now, peppercorn leases, as it says, there's not much of a financial transaction with that, but what this lease wants to do is to see the value of those peppercorn leases. If they have a value, a material value, they want to see those on the balance sheet as well, by creating a right of use asset and also a matching liability as well. So that's the other change that you may well see in the accounts. So that's really what I wanted to say on it, was to introduce it to you, really. Okay.
Liz?
Yes, the only thing I wanted to add was the reason for this coming to this committee is because it requires us to make a change to our accounting policies, and the Audit and Governance Committee, one of your key responsibilities is to ensure that we have fit for purpose and adequate accounting policies. So because of that, we're bringing this information to you.
Thank you. Councillor Godfrey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, this looks like hours of fun for all the accountants in the council. I started to glimpse the meaning behind it from your explanation, Mr. Aldridge, and thank you for that. But I think what you referred to as finance leases were what might be where we purchase a leased product for cash, a lump sum, which we now have to spread out over the life of a lease. Is that roughly the impact?
I don't think the financial flows are a great deal different. There is some slight movement in terms of the sort of presentation, and whereas before you just had an expense go through, and now it's slightly different. It will go through the revenue account in terms of interest and depreciation. So I don't actually think those financial flows are going to be a lot different. What is different is you see the asset on the balance sheet and you see the remaining liabilities on the balance sheet. I think that's the key difference, whereas before you didn't see any of that.
Perhaps it'd be easier if you could give some specific examples, like we referred to a small number of leases which are affected. Could you give some examples of those? For instance, is the Tower Street car park affected by this change?
Yes, it is, but it's one of the peppercorn ones. So you will see that now on the balance sheet, that arrangement. Yeah, it's still a peppercorn lease, but you'll see. I think what they're trying to show is that arrangement, sort of the value of that arrangement more than anything else. So we do quite well out of that arrangement, and it will show it as now show it as an asset on the balance sheet. The financial flows, there will be various accounting entries which will work its way through. I think it's if I say to you, it's going to be treated like donated income, and then, as with anything in our accounts, reversed out again. So
Liz Keys?
Yeah, I guess for context, previously we used to have lease agreements and rental agreements. So with lease agreements, it was your asset, you were leasing the asset, but you might have some short-term rental agreements where you don't consider it to be your asset, you're just renting it for someone, so you're just paying a rental every month or every year for it. What they're saying now is you can't have rental agreements. If you have a right to use that asset, it is to all intents and purposes your asset, you've got to put it on your balance sheet. So that's the difference. Everything is now a lease agreement where you show the asset and the lease liability to net each other off. You won't have simple rental agreements. Everything, the assets must be shown on your balance sheet.
Councillor Cromwell.
It's all very interesting, this, and I'll just focus on my question now rather than make the comment. So just in a practical example of this, in Kingsworthy we have a building known as Tubbs Hall, which I understand is an asset, and I believe it's owned by Winchester City Council, and I believe the Tubbs Hall Management Committee, which I guess I should declare an vague interest because I'm a trustee of, pays our annual peppercorn thing is a bunch of watercress which we hand over to the mayor. Don't know what the mayor does with it, whether he brings it in here and it's recorded and all that sort of thing, but just in a practical sense, I just want to understand how does this change in accounting affect that relationship? What's going to happen? Just so I can reassure the chairperson of this committee that actually it's going to make no difference at all. Thank you.
Okay, I'm fascinated that watercress counts as peppercorn. Can you please explain?
Yes, thankfully, I don't have to worry, and the team don't have to worry where we are receiving the peppercorn rent. The change for this standard is all about where we might be paying a peppercorn rent for stuff. So where we are the lessee rather than the lessor in the arrangement. So as Steve says, that's very limited for us. Other councils, it's a big deal. They might have lease arrangements with schools and all sorts of complications. But for us, it's very limited. We already had a very limited number of leases. We've got an even lower number of leases where we are paying a peppercorn rent. So those are the ones where it will change. And an example of that would be our park and ride car parks that we lease from the county council on a peppercorn lease. So we haven't shown the value of those, the market value of those car parks on our accounts because we're just renting the use of them. Whereas this new accounting standard says, you have to value that at its value in use, bring it onto your balance sheet, but there'll be a corresponding and offsetting lease liability of the same value, which will mean that the bottom line effect to the council will be nil. So it's an administrative burden for the council, I would say, to make sure that we've got all of our leases in order and we're accounting for them correctly, but that's something that we should be doing anyway to ensure that our accounts are materially correct.
If I can just ask a supplementary then. Is this going to add to the burden for E&Y or whoever is doing our auditing? Is this just a little example of another thing that's been thrown into the mix that complicates life for the auditors and for folks in your position? Thank you.
So the base standard IFRS 16 is due to have been implemented for about the past 5 years, and it's been deferred and deferred. So it's extant in the private sector generally, and it's extant in other parts of the public sector. Will it be work creating? There will be work needed to. The main point of the work creation will be in the year one, so in an implementation, so doing all the reviews of all your arrangements that now may be considered to be lease type arrangements where you are the lessee and the right of use asset is created. So there is work, but it is an international standard. I should say that the part around peppercorn rents, that is not in the base standard, that is a code adaptation of the base standard. So that is something that comes from the local government financial reporting framework over and above the base standard. And that's designed to identify where you're given a benefit, where you're given a financial benefit. So will it create some work? Yes, in year one, you will see this in our plan for 24-25. We will want to assess that the council has got it right because it will have a material impact, I expect. Or you'd have to show it doesn't have a material impact if it doesn't. Is it a big driver of work? Probably no, going forward. And it is it's a recognised standard across the private sector and other parts of the public sector.
Thank you, Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. This bunch of watercress has got me overexcited, as so often. Where we actually receive a peppercorn rent, do we identify the difference between a normal market rent and the value of that peppercorn so that we can allocate it to and identify it as part of our grant programme?
That's currently a piece of work that we're undertaking with the property board to look at the rental agreements that we have, any peppercorn rents, and to look at whether that is commensurate with our grant programme.
My question is regarding the exemptions, which are that it's a lease term which is less than 12 months and under £10,000. Can I just ask, when it's a less than 12 months, is that less than 12 months left to run of the lease? And also whether it's less than 12 months and under 10,000 or under 10,000. I like bringing Boolean logic into these meetings. And where did these thresholds come from? Were they set by the cabinet or the finance officer?
It's for us to, in fact, the standard doesn't define what lower value is, and it's for us to decide that. And we have aligned ours with our existing de minimis capitalisation threshold. So that's what we've done with that. Now, Simon and the sort of guidance with the standard would think, oh, not sure I like that. It's 10,000 too high. But we can demonstrate, we will be able to demonstrate to Simon that's not going to cut out material numbers at all. So I'm sure you won't have a problem.
That was going to be my next question: is whether there's any leases which will not be captured by this exemption.
In reality, that the 12 months exemption will knock a few out, will knock a few cars out, but in terms of big things, not really, not anything that you need to worry about.
Thank you. Any further questions, or should we move to debate? Okay. The recommendations are that we note this report in respect to the Council Statement of Accounts, and that we approve the changes in the accounting policies with the implementation of IFRS 16 leases. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much, and thank you, Steve. And we now move on to item number 9 on the agenda, which is the Risk Management Policy 25-26. Amy, trying to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So it's recommended tonight that the committee review and comment on the draft risk management policy and risk appetite for the coming year, which is to be considered by Cabinet at its March meeting. The risk management policy for 25-26 sets out the Council's approach to risk management, details the arrangements for managing risks, and also includes the corporate risk register as an appendix. And the minimal proposed changes to the policy for the coming year are set out at 11.6 of the Cabinet report. And there are no proposed changes to the Council's risk appetite for the coming year, which remains as moderate overall. And the corporate risk register is reviewed quarterly by ELB, and any changes reported to Audit and Governance Committee via the quarterly governance report. And a summary of the most recent ELB review is included in the Q3 governance monitoring report, which is item 12 of your agenda this evening. Questions?
Thank you. Over to councillors for questions. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I have one large question and two small ones. Should local government reorganisation feature as a separate risk on the risk register, or should it be regarded as something that may add another dimension to all the existing risks? My second question is regarding CR 003 on page 211, which refers to the need to engage local councillors when there's an activity in their ward. It currently says just encouraged local council involvement. I feel it should say it should be mandated, except where there's a confidentiality question. And on CR 11, on page 216, do we need a hot weather plan as well as a cold weather plan? Because we are seeing very high temperatures in the summer, and we know that some of our residents and our tenants are very much at risk. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, can we take the first question first, which is the ominous threat of LGA or reorganisation beyond the risk register? Councillor Cutler.
Interestingly, this was discussed earlier today. The corporate risk register as appended to this paper is the current corporate risk register, which is reviewed by ELB on a regular basis. It hasn't, I'm informed, been deemed appropriate yet to put it on the risk register, but obviously it will be one of those things that would be monitored. And if this committee feels that it is something that ELB should consider, they could make that recommendation.
Okay, moving to item 2, which is the councillors. It should be mandated that councillors are informed.
I'll take that.
Okay, Gareth.
Thank you very much for that. So as far as this is concerned, this is a control measure that's contained on the corporate risk register. In terms of the higher level decisions, the ones that are seen before committees, the report templates are currently constructed in such a way that they provide a provision for report writers to confirm that they've consulted already with ward members. So I'm content that that measure exists at that level. In terms of delegated decisions that are delegated to officers, again, that's enshrined in the Constitution at Part 3.4, which does provide, again, for ward member consultation. So I'm content personally that those issues are already addressed elsewhere.
Councillor Powell, do you have a
I have reservations to whether that is observed in practice. And personally, I would ask that we do a few checks on that. Perhaps we should ask. I don't want to make this onerous for officers because they're all working very hard to do their best. But I do feel that sometimes that is not taking place. How should we bring that to your attention, Mr. John?
I mean, that is obviously enshrined already in the corporate risk register. I'm very happy to obviously take any reports where that isn't taking place. So.
And finally, Councillor Powell's third point, which is, I think, is CR 11. The current course has a cold weather plan, and whether that we should add a hot weather plan.
Thank you, Chair. I can take that because it falls under the emergency planning banner that I lead on. You're absolutely right. There is a cold and snow plan within the Local Resilience Forum. The Local Resilience Forum, of which the council is a member, has a role for warning and informing residents, businesses, etc. And we take advice and guidance from government that already produces a hot weather and heat wave plan and guidance, as indeed does the NHS. So our role is very much passing on those messages through social media, other outlets, to ensure that the public are informed about the precautions that they need to make through excessive periods of excessive heat.
Can I ask, is that actually covered under CR 11, or is that under a different section?
It doesn't reference that in there at the moment as one of the controls, but we can update that at the next quarterly update to make sure that is referenced there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. I haven't had the opportunity to compare this important policy with the previous version from last year. But the key change I was monitoring, which we made a lot of improvements to last year, is Section 8 around risk appetite. Have there been any changes, significant changes to the risk appetite section in this version?
I think Councillor Cutler wants to answer that.
Yeah, I think the only changes are to change the headings to align with the headings in the council plan. We continue to have an open appetite on the greener, faster element and on the good homes for all element, which used to be called Homes for All element. The other areas we maintain the moderate risk.
My question is regarding CR 009, the cybersecurity section. I'm pleased to see that the impact and likelihood both have been reduced, but looking at the current controls, they all seem to be, as far as I can see, things which will reduce the likelihood rather than the impact. And so can you explain why the regard is the impact will also be reduced? Liz?
Thank you. Yes, we review regularly these corporate risks on the corporate risk register, and I am content that that is the correct residual risk rating to have for this cyber security risk. We've done lots of work to ensure that systems are compartmentalized, that was the word I was after, and that the cyber protection that we have is not just about preventing access, but also preventing damage should a malicious attack occur at the council. So that's why I feel it's correct to have lowered both the impact and the likelihood.
If I can do a supplementary, the reason for my concern on this is that obviously as we go forward, the council relies on IT ever more year by year. So I would imagine that an IT problem would have a greater impact as the more we rely on it rather than less.
Yes, that could well be true, but things like cloud systems means that where we are breaking apart the risk and the potential impact of that. So where we used to host all of our systems on-prem here, so we would host them on our servers here, that meant that if there was a targeted attack on our servers, it could take out all of the systems. But cloud-based systems is an example where we can actually compartmentalize that risk by having data and systems hosted in different places by different people. So if there's an attack in one place, it wouldn't have quite such widespread impact as it might have done in the past.
Thank you. If I see no hands up, I'll go again. Councillor Cummoyson.
Got two questions here. I'll just start with one though, and it relates to the LGR question. And I think the area that I think is most impacts, but you could argue it elsewhere, is the CR 001, so the council plan. And my instinct tells me that just dealing with the LGR and the way that might get implemented will have an impact on risk on the delivery of some programs. One that comes to mind is station approach, perhaps rather than central Winchester regeneration, which I think has got its own momentum already. And the other is climate action. So that's just my instinct, but I wonder if has this been assessed or is it to be assessed at this point?
I think there's an element about distinction between the corporate risk register and the project risk registers, which presumably would include that as a more definitive, more defined. But I take your broad point that the council plan may be the area that's at long-term risk with local government reorganisation. Given that it's a plan to 2030 and the likelihood of us existing in 2030, that would be true. I think I probably need to emphasise that this paper really is about the policy. The corporate risk register is an example of implementing that policy and is regularly reviewed. I don't think there's any problem with this committee, which sees the corporate risk register on a regular basis anyway, commenting on what they think is right. But I just wanted to emphasise that we need to be clear that the policy, the broader risk policy, which is what the paper is about, is that you're happy with that. I think that's key, because that's the paper that goes to cabinet. The risk register flows from that and is regularly reviewed, and of course this committee is quite regularly comments on the corporate risk register.
Did you want to add to that, Liz?
Only to reassure committee that in the same way as the budget paper coming forward to council later this week says it's really too early to be setting aside funds or trying to estimate costs or financial impact to the council, it's also very early in the process to know how it will impact us. But just to reassure committee, as Councillor Cutler has said, it's reviewed quarterly by senior management, so ELB have a thorough discussion looking at all the risks, and that will of course, I'm sure, form a thread through all of these corporate risks that we'll take into consideration at that next review.
Thank you. I'll have a go with regarding the recent outage of IT due to I think there's a burst water pipe, and also part of the Guildhall, one of the ceilings collapsed. Whether the degradation of our buildings is captured as part of our risk management plan.
I'm happy to take that question. So corporate risks CR004 talks about failure to have plans and processes in place to recover and maintain services after a major incident. And that was a major incident, and it's covered in a paper later on this agenda. So we wouldn't have that as a separate risk, but clearly the mitigations that we have in place for this risk here should help us to adequately deal with major incidents such as that.
And does that also cover parts of the ceiling collapsing as well, or is that just that IT incident?
I mean, that is not about specific types of incident. That is about our agility as an organisation to recover from any major incident, making sure that we have the training, resources, people in place to be able to recover from any of those. So it's not specific to an event, but clearly we have operational risk registers as well, which will cover things such as ceiling collapses, regular maintenance and inspection of buildings. So that will be reflected on those operational risk registers.
Thank you very much. Did Councillor Cornwallis have a second question, or it's your chance?
Well, actually, you just covered it. But I think what I'm taking away from both the answer from Councillor Cutler and yourself, Mrs. Keys, is that this is about the corporate risk rather than about specific events and projects. And that maybe I haven't passed that out, my question hadn't passed that out. Where is the project risk covered somewhere else, or is that not here at Audit and Governance?
So that's the difference between these being our corporate risks on our corporate risk register. So these are our highest profile, biggest impact corporate risks that we have consideration for in all of our decision making. We have operational risk registers, which are reviewed quarterly by those risk owners. And then we also have the project risk registers, which are maintained separately. So our major projects have those separate risk registers for factors and impacts specific to those particular projects. And as reports for those projects come through, those risk registers are updated and appended.
Okay, and those would be heard in a different forum, perhaps regeneration, if it was about risks associated with those projects. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay, if we have no further questions from councillors, move to debate and the recommendation that we say we have reviewed. Oh, Councillor Godfrey, go for it.
I was waiting for a debate just to have a chip in. I'm delighted that people should start raising issues at this meeting around local government reorganisation. I'm taking it, working on the basis that local government reorganisation will happen. Therefore, it is no longer a risk, and therefore we don't need to worry about it in context of this policy. I think it's really important that members and officers are aware of this policy and support and employ this policy wherever possible. It has been refined over many years, and I believe it represents an important tool within the safeguarding aspect of our work to ensure that this authority continues on a straight path. We should know, we should have a way of identifying the risks and managing those, and I believe this policy achieves that. And we should make sure that all parts of the council do employ this policy. I'm delighted that it has not significantly changed in this current year, which I believe does represent stability, welcome stability going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. Any other comments from members? Councillor Power.
Chairman, would we like to ask Cabinet to consider whether local government reorganisation does have an impact and whether it should be considered as a separate risk, or as, and I think Councillor Godfrey has summed it up very nicely, as a factor which may affect the risk of existing risks, which I think is a sensible way to look at it.
I would like to see that referred to the Cabinet as well, and I would, although I take Councillor Godfrey's statement that it is a fact, governments do change their minds and their timelines, so there is still an element of uncertainty about the whole process. So I say we've finished agenda item 9. I've already pointed out the typo on page 215, which I'm sure to be corrected. We can move on to item number 10, the approval of the internal audit plan and charter. Anthony Harvey to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Purpose of paper tonight is just to provide you with a brief update on where we are in terms of developing the internal audit plan and the internal audit charter for the forthcoming financial year. Traditionally, we would have always brought the plan to the committee immediately preceding the start of the financial year. Unfortunately, we are not quite in a position to be there quite yet. It's down to a number of factors. So obviously committee dates have moved around a little bit to accommodate the statement of accounts, which is wholly understandable because they got to meet the backstop dates. Reported to the last committee that the global internal audit standards have had a considerable impact upon some of our underlying documentation and the updating and around that as well. And also there's been a lot of recent developments which have been discussed at length tonight as well that really we just need to take into account. What I didn't want to bring to you was a plan that was not quite ready and would be subject to quite a significant level of change. So just to give you an overview of where we are, we've now met with each of the strategic directors and when necessary, their relevant management teams to gain their insights. We're pulling all of that together. We're taking into account the refresh council plan, the updated risk registers, which have been discussed tonight, also any impacts on the relevant sort of service risk registers as well. And what we want to do is pull all of that together to make sure the plan is going to be as current and as relevant to the needs of the organisation for 25-26. Now, what we will always do is bring that plan formally to yourselves for approval. And as always, is reflected within our progress reports. Any in-year changes to the plan, as things change within the organisations, we'll also bring to the committee as always. So you will get full sight of the plan, you will get full input put into the plan, as you always will do. But I just didn't want to bring something that wasn't quite ready. In terms of the charters, they've now been all updated. I just need to tailor them for each of the organisations. It'd be lovely if every committee was named the same, every management team, but they're quite long documents. They're even longer now to take into account the changes for the global internal audit standards. It just doesn't make sense to bring the charter to one meeting without the plan or vice versa. So what I propose is that I'll bring the plan and the charter to the next available audit committee meeting for your due consideration. And also, once we've agreed the proposed internal audit plan with the management team, then perhaps that can be said, certainly with the chair of the audit committee, or if indeed wider with members, for consideration prior to the next forthcoming meeting. But as I say, as always, there will always be that opportunity for you to comment throughout the year. And certainly, I think we've always maintained that the plans do need to remain fluid to the changing needs of the organisation. I think certainly the forthcoming year, if not the forthcoming years, that will be even more pertinent than ever. So I'll pause there, but more than happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. I'll go first this time. Would I be right in understanding that this, you'll find yourself later this year beginning the audit for 2025-26 before we've approved the plan, and so you'll be acting a de facto approval before the actual approval is made. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it will only really have a particular impact on those audits which were flagged for commencement during Q1 that we would, you know, be at the early scope and stages before the plans actually come through for you to consideration. So it's not that the plan's always going to be set in stone and, you know, it's too late for your approval before the die is cast whatsoever. It's just due to timing. It's that, you know, the plan's agreed as always with the senior management team before the start of the financial year, and it's formally approved for yourselves. It's just a little bit out of sync. What we didn't want to do is obviously hold up any of that work that needs to commence as soon as possible during Q1. But I'm sure once you've seen the plan, you've seen how it's aligned to the corporate risk registers, some of your strategic priorities, and also the sort of service risk registers, council plan priorities, and also the outputs from the insights through the management team. That those reviews that were at the very early stages of commencement, hopefully feel that the committee would agree with regardless.
Okay, so in layman's terms, and I consider myself very much a layman, you'll be doing the meat and potatoes stuff, as it were, before the approval. So it's not going to be particularly anything dramatic or contentious that we need to worry about.
It could well be, but I'm sure if there's anything that would be what's the right word, quite controversial, then we wouldn't be looking to commence that in the very early stages. But with all reviews, certain timescales are agreed with the management team, and certain priorities have agreed in some work. You know, it would be pertinent to start it sooner rather than later. Some of your meat and potatoes, so to speak, some of your more routine reviews that probably would never feature on your risk registers because they're really stable systems, but we would need to look at it anyway. For example, your payroll systems periodically. Then we agree the relative timings of those reviews. So, for example, not to impact upon year end and the production of the statement of accounts or various other key activities. So it's not quite as simple as that, but I don't think there would be anything too controversial in the plan that we would be looking to start in Q1 unless there was a very, very, very good reason for doing that. And again, we'd look to agree that with yourselves ahead of the start of the financial year anyway. It's just really a case of timing. I think it's been up against us a little bit this year.
Thank you. Liz, did you have a point on that? Sorry.
The only thing I would add is that we don't start with a blank piece of paper every year. The risk assessment that we do in order to target the internal audit resources is the same every year. So, and that risk assessment is used to identify a cycle of different audits. So audits that have just happened in the last financial year may not be on this year's plan. So I think it's important just to look at each of those reviews in the context of that rolling audit plan across several years. So it's not started as a blank piece of paper every year. We would look at the context of what audits have just been done and what the current risk assessment is.
Thank you. Councillor Comoyson.
Just like to query the part of the recommendation which says at the next available committee audit and governance committee meeting. So I guess this is a question for the MO, which is when will that be? When will that next audit and governance meeting be? Will it be early in the next municipal year, or will it be before the end of this year? And I'm bearing in mind that local elections have been postponed because of the consultation on LGR and Devo. Does that have an impact on the timing of when an audit and governance meeting could occur.
Gareth?
Thank you very much. The next scheduled meeting is currently the 17th of July.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, the follow-up would be, is that going to get, could that get disrupted by any consultation work that's going on around Devo and LGR?
I personally, I think that's unlikely to happen.
Councillor Power?
Thank you, Chairman. To put this in context, I can only think of one event that caused us to change the internal audit plan, and that was some years ago. The committee typically has never changed the plan. However, I think to cover the exposure of the chairman, I do think we ought to have sight of this before he signs it off. And I don't think we need to meet in committee. But the real question is, will you need a March meeting next year to have it approved, so we don't have this delay next year?
I think there will be a lot less impact upon ourselves in terms of the standards changing, and with a bit more certainty over the timings of those meetings, providing I know when the committee is, then we will factor it in accordingly. So as I'm sure you're aware, we look after a large range of partners, and it's been quite a challenge this year because the committees have jumped around. I was working to certain deadlines and then they've changed. I think for next year, hopefully there will be a lot less certainty, but also as well, we would have gone through the planning process aligned to the new standards at least once, and we'd be a lot more geared up towards it. I think that I possibly underestimated some of the overhead of what those changes to the standards have meant in terms of the level of documentation and the level of rigour that previously we've always gone through, but haven't necessarily had to put it all down on paper, and it's kind of that which has caught us out slightly as well.
Thank you, Gareth?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I can confirm that there is one scheduled for the 5th of March 2026. So we've got that already in hand.
Okay, I see no more hands up, so I shall, if you want to move to debate, any sort of general points, you can make them now. Or I'll move to recommendations, that we delegate the authority to a Director of Finance in consultation with the Chair of the Audit and Governance Committee, which I think will be me for the time being, to endorse the internal audit plan and internal audit charter prior to formal approval by the Audit and Governance Committee at the next available committee meeting. Is that all agreed and endorsed? Thank you. Okay, that moves us on to item 11 on the agenda, which is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Policy Framework. I think Simon Howson to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report presents the Council's updated Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Policy, along with a strategy and action plan that will enable the Council to further embed EDI across the organisation. The Council has a statutory duty under Section 49 of the Equality Act that requires all public bodies to consider the needs of all individuals in their day-to-day work, whether that is shaping policy or delivering services. The public sector equality duty is a duty on public bodies and others carrying out public functions. The current public sector equality duty was adopted by Cabinet in January 2022, and at that time we said that we'd review it within the following 4 years. We've brought forward by a few months, really, or nearly a year, to allow us to respond to the Corporate Peer Challenge recommendation from last year. The Corporate Peer Challenge team acknowledged and recognised in their final report that the Council was on a journey for embedding equality, diversity, inclusion in its services and across the organisation, and that it could enhance the work that it was doing by revising, refreshing, updating its strategy. What officers have done is look at that current policy, that current public sector equality duty document that was adopted by Cabinet, and reshaped it and enhanced and sharpened the focus, and separating out the different elements in that document to essentially create a policy document for the council, which builds on the commitment that the council has to equality, diversity and inclusion, ensuring that the council complies with the duty as set out in the Equalities Act, but similarly by having a separate strategy and robust action plan that aligns to the LGA equality framework document that at that time Cabinet committed, and more recently committed to us following and achieving the different modules in that document. More recently, since that policy was adopted in January 2022, a member forum was adopted with Councillor Becker as the champion, the lead Cabinet member for equality, diversity, inclusion. That group meets regularly, pretty much every 3-4 months, and is really progressing well with understanding equality, diversity, inclusion, not only within the council, but across the district, and working forward in that area. And even more recently than that, after the completion of the work by the peer challenge team, we've actually set up an officer network with officers from across the organisation to ensure that we've got that coverage across the organisation. So we've got officers in housing, comms, other teams, grants, ensuring that we've got that coverage of what equality, diversity, inclusion is, and how we then embed that not only in the organisation as us as an employer with our employees, but also in the services that we provide to residents, and working with partners, contractors and businesses as well. So before you this evening is an updated policy, strategy and action plan. There are few changes to that document that was approved in January 2022. It really is kind of a dissection, if you like, of that document into a more readable, transparent, focused policy document with a separate strategy and a separate action plan that will enable us going forward to measure our progress against those actions in that action plan, which will enable us to achieve the different levels in the LGA framework document. Progress against that action plan will be monitored not only by the officer group at their regular meetings. We'd also produce regular reports to the member forum, and we will also bring, as we did last year, to the July meeting, an annual report on the progress that we are achieving against our EDI objectives. The strategy, or sorry, the policy sets out our 4 equality, diversity, inclusion objectives. These have been updated from what was approved back in January 22 to align to the LGA framework document, which will enable us to more clearly, more tangibly monitor our progress to achieving that LGA equality framework document. So a real sharpening of the focus, enabling us to progress at pace with EDI across the organisation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Cormoiston.
Yes, I note that within the policy we talk about protected characteristics, of which there are, the usual characteristics. I didn't notice anything around neurodiversity or mental health characteristics, for want of a better word. For example, autistic or ADHD, and I'm absolutely confident we have many employees who are certainly in the ADHD area. So I just wonder what is our stance in terms of I don't know, protecting that part of our workforce, and the diversity that they bring to the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The examples that you give would be included under the disability protected characteristic, and the council itself has actually done a lot of work, both internally and the member forum, with groups that you've referred to, inviting leaders from those organisations to give a presentation to help the member forum understand more about the good work that goes on within our district. And at the moment, the members of that forum are actually researching the groups that exist within the district that support the different protected characteristics within the Equality Act to help us better understand what support exists within our district to support our residents, but to look where there are also gaps that we may be able to support, bridge, signpost, work with other organisations that will support our residents.
Councillor Power.
Chairman, I have a sort of wide question and a pertinent question. I'm getting increasingly concerned about residents that do not have digital access. I think of them as Luddites, which is fine. We need to celebrate them. We do need to work with them. And are we confident that this policy actually ensures that we do meet their needs? That's the easy question. My second question is, how do we know that this policy is working? How will we know that we're doing a good job? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As part of the work that officers do for any changes or new services or any new or changes to policies, there is the Equality Impact Assessment, which will look at the impacts on the protected characteristics. Obviously, there are a number of protected characteristics there that will cross-cut what you were referring to with digital skills. Although it's not specifically seen as a protected characteristic, obviously, but we would encourage officers to ensure that that is brought out in the Equality Impact Assessment to understand that nobody is discriminated against. There is also the socio-economic duty, which is not in law. It is recommended that authorities do consider socio-economic discrimination within its policies, within its services, and maybe as a development as we move forward, that is something that we might look at enhancing this policy with. Other authorities are already doing it, but it's not mandated. It's not something that we have to do in law, so we wouldn't necessarily be looking to do that right now, but the next iteration of this, that is something we can look at for sure, yes.
And how will we know we're doing a good job? How do we know it's working?
So we have the action plan, which will enable us to monitor progress. We are working against the LGA Equality Framework document. There are a number of levels. There's 3 different levels with a set of different criteria under each levels. We've got the officer group to give us that kind of check and balance to ensure that we are progressing against that action plan. We'll also bring updates to the member forum as well to ensure that we are following through. And similarly, as I've said, we will bring an annual report and an update to this meeting. I don't propose we bring a quarterly update, but certainly an annual update on the progress that we're making against that action plan.
Thank you. I have a question. I think it's regarding Appendix 4, which is page 256, which is how the policy affects various individuals. And I noticed that various categories have been left blank. For instance, the positive impact on the basis of sexuality, age, religion, belief, gender reassignment. Is the ambition that we will fill in all those blanks where it asks us for existing evidence of those policies being effective?
Chair, yes, we can look to fill those blanks in where the evidence is currently shown as blank.
Councillor Plinger.
Just thinking about digital exclusion. Obviously, we're moving towards a world that seems exclusively digital. There isn't any level at which we would accept that some people will be left behind because they simply can't access that. I mean, do we have a commitment to meet our residents where they are, even if they can't keep up?
Yes, we do, because obviously what we're trying to achieve is that we hear the views and we are engaging with everybody whether or not they are engaging with us digitally. Digital exclusion is a huge issue. It's not simply an age issue. It can also be a disability issue if people have disabilities in reading. It can be an ethnicity issue if people don't speak English and they're not able to access digital documents and have them translated. So it is an issue that cuts across different protected characteristics, and it is something that we continue to do. The work of the Social Inclusion Partnership has been pivotal in this. We have run sessions to improve digital inclusion particularly for older people through our sheltered housing schemes. We've also, through the rural, I think it was the Rural Prosperity Fund, wasn't it? Lucille ran a program, a broader program, increasing people's digital skills. So it is something that's not just seen through this lens. It is a commitment that we are demonstrating throughout the council.
Necessarily age related. I had a case back in the summer of somebody in their 20s who was functionally illiterate, and we could only communicate with him via pictures.
Liz, yeah.
If you don't mind me adding in, I just wanted to cover our digital vision that we have as an organisation, and we've been really clear in there that it's our digital approach is clearly around looking at digital solutions, but designed around the needs of our customers, and that's really at the heart of our digital vision and digital strategy. So it's allowing us to free up the resource that we need to help those people who won't be interacting with us on a digital basis.
Thank you.
Okay, my turn again. It's regarding action 1.4 to collect more data on protected characteristics of our service users. My understanding is that the idea is that this information should be given to us voluntarily. We're asking the service users to volunteer this information, and for them to do so, they would need to have absolute assurance that this information will be held securely. So can I ask what actually is the intention of how are you going to hold this? How are you going to collect and hold this data?
When we collect this data, it's usually through an online consultation using our citizen space platform, which is a secure environment. We have no issues with data security in there. The data that we hold is held within our data protection policy and data privacy policy, which we will direct respondents to should they wish to read that, so that they understand how we use and maintain their data, which is obviously securely, if they choose to submit it. But it is voluntary when we ask equality, diversity, inclusion questions. It is only if they want to give it. It's not mandatory.
Can I ask a supplementary on that? Is that residents who volunteer this data will also have the assurance that it's not going to affect their service in any way, and in effect, the information they provide will go into one box, and it will not be, that information will not be made available to the people who are providing the service to them.
All responses to consultations are anonymous and confidential.
Thank you. Councillor Becker.
Sorry, I just wanted to highlight why we ask these questions, because I think there is concern where you are collecting information which is really personal about people, and for which people have been, and particularly in the past, persecuted, and that is something that we are unfortunately starting to see in other parts of the world. And so we do understand why there may be a reluctance to provide this information, but it is really important for us. It helps us identify and assess any disadvantage that is associated with a particular characteristic. It helps us to plan improvements to services. It helps us to understand who we're hearing from when we are planning services, and making sure that what we're planning is actually going to be beneficial for the people who it's targeted at. It also very boringly helps us to comply with the public sector equality duty, which requires us to prevent discrimination, promote equality of opportunity, and to foster good relations. And we can't do that if we don't know about the different groups that we're hearing from. So it's absolutely critical that we do ask for this information and provide that reassurance that the information is dealt with appropriately. But it is so helpful and absolutely critical for us developing and delivering good services that we know that we're hearing from a broad range of people across the community.
Thank you. That's reassured me a great deal. Thank you. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Howson reassured us on the confidentiality of data collected electronically, but we will be collecting some of this data manually. And how are we ensuring the confidentiality of that?
We would adopt established principles and procedures for ensuring that any confidential information is kept away in a locked drawer, locked cabinet, is only used and seen by those authorised to do so.
And would there be a retention policy that we would ensure secure disposal?
Very much so, yes. We have an updated retention disposal schedule which would capture and provide guidance for officers on how they would securely dispose of that information, and similarly how long they would keep it for.
So can I just and the whole point of this is that this information is purely to make sure that we are providing a coverage to all protected characteristics groups, and this information will never be used for any other purpose whatsoever. Is that correct?
That is quite right. It is all anonymous, it is confidential, and as Councillor Beck has already said, it helps us to establish services that meet the needs of our residents, recognising that they are our residents are diverse.
Thank you. Any further questions from councillors? Okay, I'm go to the the recommendations. We'll have debate first. Councillor Cumwison.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, firstly, given what's going on in the States at the minute, I am delighted that we have an EDI policy. I think if we keep calling it EDI, maybe Chairman Musk will fail to notice it's the same as DEI. But anyway, regarding the kind of in relation to the question I asked, I do wonder whether we could do something a little bit in there just to distinguish, define what we mean by disability, so that we make it clear that there, what's in scope and what isn't. Sorry,
I'll just jump in. The protected characteristics are defined in the Act, and they are. So we haven't selected those characteristics. Those are characteristics that are set out in the Equality Act, and definitions and are found in the Act for each of those.
Yeah. Okay. But if we don't have to necessarily change what's in the Act, we can explain that disability. I'm suggesting, and maybe there's reasons not to do this, we could explain that disability includes blah 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 blah, just so that it is explicitly called out. Not sure if called out's the right word, but explicitly referred to, so that someone else coming along doesn't ask the same question as I ask of, well, does that include me? Does that include ADHD? Am I a protected characteristics? Because frankly, most of us don't really know what's protected. Right. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Cumwison. I think that's a valuable point, because when you say disability, people might have one particular view in their head, and it might not include deafness, it might not include blindness and stuff as well. And so, any more debate? Then we should move to do you approve this equality, diversion and inclusion policy, strategy and action plan 25-28 as set out in the appendices? Agreed. And do you approve the equality objectives as set out in paragraph 2 of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy 25-28?
Agreed.
Agreed. Marvellous. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, can I just,
go on.
We had Anna Bodman, that was an officer of the council. She's just left, unfortunately. She put so much work into this area, so I just wondered if we could record our thanks for the effort she put into this work.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Can we make sure that's put in the minutes? Because it's always, that's where people will actually see it and read it. So thank you very much. Moving on to item 12 on the agenda, it's the Q3 governance monitoring. Simon Howson to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the usual quarterly monitoring report that we bring to you. It covers the period October to December last year. In the report, there's a brief update on declarations of gifts and hospitality, as well as the internal audit actions that have been completed and overdue, as well as the internal audits that have been finalised within the last quarter. I'll bring to your attention in paragraph 11.11 the internal audits that were finalised during the last quarter that actually referred to either the previous year or a previous year before that, but I think you may have asked for at previous meetings as to the progress. So you've got now the finalised IT cybersecurity response audit, the tree management, mobile devices and virtualisation. Those audits have now been finalised and the audit, the action plans for those audits are in place. And for the limited assurance audits, there is an update further on in the report to show the progress that has been made against the actions to treat, mitigate the weaknesses that were observed by the auditor. In terms of internal audit management tracking, we're still very, very low in terms of the figures, at just 5 overdue internal audit actions. We monitor those very, very closely, run a close eye on those and have our own tracker on those to make sure that we are working with officers with responsibility for those actions, that they are well aware of them and will follow up with them to make sure that they, as far as possible, meet those deadlines. There is an update on the audits that have overdue internal audit actions there. You'll see in the table, information governance, human resources around policies, human resources recruitment and the Green Economic Development Strategy and Action Plan. Very, very low numbers. No high priority actions are overdue. Further on in the report, paragraphs 12, there are the updates on the audits that received limited assurance, which I know helps understand the weaknesses that were identified in those reports and what's been done since that time to give that assurance that those weaknesses are being addressed and being dealt with. Further on, there's the update that's been referred to earlier on risk management, the changes that have been made more recently to the corporate risks, an update on the code of conduct complaints. Then in paragraph 15, it's already been referred to this evening, there is an update which was previously asked for at this committee, the disaster recovery incident on the 21st of November 2024. And an update on the actions that are in the annual governance statement. Appendix 2 is the internal audit progress report. And Mr. Harvey, I don't know whether you want to say anything on your reports.
Sorry, thanks, Simon. No, just the plan's progressing well. As Simon's previously noted, those reports that concluded with limited assurance, the outcomes from those audits have previously been reported. It was timely to bring the findings from them reviews relevant to the year it related to when the issues were identified, so have featured in previous annual reports and opinions and or progress reports where relevant. It's just the fact now that management actions have been agreed, signed off, and I'm really pleased to note that in most of the cases that they have also been implemented with none of the corresponding actions currently overdue. The audit plan has moved on a little bit more, so some of those reports that were at draft report stage at the time of writing have now been finalised, and everything's up and running that shouldn't be in the audit to wow progress. So I look forward to bringing the outcome for those reviews to the next committee on the 17th of July, I believe it was, if not before. Thank you.
Thank you. And I can just say that I'm looking forward to implement the retention schedule outstanding action, which has been a regular feature of all the audit and governance meetings. I look forward to that not being a regular feature at the next meeting. Any questions from councillors? Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very happy to see the report on the IT incident on the 21st of November. We've got a very good report on how the process worked. However, there's no note in the report as to how we are going to prevent a recurrence I wondered if we could have an update on that. Thank you.
Liz?
Yes, so as part of our work since the incident happened, we have done a full review. We have spoken with all members of Gold Command to identify lessons learned. And as part of that, we are reviewing things such as the location of the server room. However, I can just confirm to the committee that in this particular example, the offending water tanks have now been made redundant. They are empty. There is no water in them, and the chute that is in place to dispose of any water that overflows is now cleared and maintained regularly to ensure that should there be any water in that loft space, it would exit the building safely rather than through the ceiling and into the server room. But yes, it's part of a wider review of all of the lessons learned from the incident.
Councillor Godfrey.
Couple of questions, Mr. Chairman. Starting with section 15, the IT incident in November. The detailed timeline is included in section 15, but I'm not sure if this is good or bad. What were the expected periods of recovery included in the disaster recovery plan at the time of the incident for each of the services affected?
It was expected that within 2 days we would have stood up our disaster recovery location and the operating services. So as the timeline shows, 95% of services, external facing services to customers, were available the following day. And we had stood up the disaster recovery hub that following day. So within 24 hours that had been stood up.
But were all the services that should have were covered by the disaster recovery plan and impacted by this incident recovered within the planned period?
Yes, they were. The services which took longer to stand up were because we were reliant on an external third party who supplied a system to us doing something at their end. So all of the work that we could do as a team here was done within the 24 hours, and the delay on the 5% of services which took slightly longer were due to arrangements with third parties. So we have those service level agreements in place with those third parties for these occasions. So yes, they were turned around within the expected timings.
So we didn't need outgoing phone functionality or office Wi-Fi for several days after the incident. Is that what was in the plan?
No, so as shown in the table, the telephone lines were available from Friday the 22nd of November. So it's always anticipated that we would have a disaster recovery hub up and running. It's not necessarily, depending on the incident, it's not necessarily that we would have all staff in the offices working business as usual. So that disaster recovery hub allowed us to deliver 95% of services and to take telephone calls the following day. So yes, that was anticipated.
If I can then go on to a related issue, in section 12, dealing with cyber security. Is it section 12? Yes. We have now developed the cyber incident response plan. When was this last tested?
An excellent question. So just to differentiate, the IT incident that we had in November that section 15 of the report is about was not a cyber incident. It was to do with the facilities and the electrical supply to the servers. But I'm pleased to report that the cyber security incident response plan was tested in December, just looking at colleagues, so very recently, and we had an external third party come in to make sure that they that we ran it as an incident and that we learned as many lessons as we could to improve that document going forward.
Regarding that incident, can I just ask? It's mentioned elsewhere in the document that it had it delayed the information disposal by small amount? Did it delay any other of the workings of the council by a significant amount, or did you catch up fairly quickly?
No, due to our ability to divert IT resources from our shared service, we were able to have minimal impact. So there was very little delay. There was also no data that was lost during the IT incident as well.
Yeah, as a supplementary, that the Hyde Lodge backup, is that an auxiliary set of servers, or is that just information backup?
So our shared service allows us to have a backup at our sister site in Andover with our partner Test Valley Borough Council. So information from both sites is backed up constantly between the two sites. So Hyde Lodge is our disaster recovery hub, so where we can access those systems from. We were in the process then and are just about to implement a new backup solution, which is immutable storage, which will allow us to have our backup hosted in the cloud, so off-prem, and that will allow us to stand up our services even more quickly. So there'll be no taking equipment from Winchester in a car, driving it to Andover, plugging it in Andover, and restarting services in that way.
Thank you. Councillor Conroyson.
Guess we're all fixating on this one issue here. I guess bearing in mind the lessons learned, how long what's our estimate for how long it would take to get a full recovery of services right across the board? If another incident of a different type, because I expect we're now fully aware of the water problem, but some other incident might kind of, take the service things out. What would be our recovery time covering all those services, including the phones? Would that be a lot quicker in the future?
There are certain things that we have put in place since this incident, for instance, having an additional phone line that comes into a different building. So we had a backup phone line, but it came into the same building. So we've now got a new phone line that comes into a different building. There are things such as our immutable storage that we've got in the cloud and our new backup solution that we've put in place, but it genuinely depends on what the incident is. If it was a cyber incident, if it had been a cyber incident, it realistically, and I've looked at neighbours who have unfortunately been targeted, it could take weeks or months to recover from a cyber incident, to get back to business as usual. If it was something that had destroyed the servers in the server room, that would have been very different from just not having any power to the servers. So it's so linked to what the incident is, that it's very difficult to say how long I would think the recovery would be.
Councillor Planger.
So what's the plan if there is a cyber attack?
Go on.
After the weeping, I think we've got a cyber incident response plan that sets out exactly what we need to do, and it's about detection, and it's about dealing with any malicious attack on the council. So we are talking about an incident usually unfolding over days, hours and days. So we have learned from incidents that have happened elsewhere that identifying that you've been targeted quickly is the most important thing to protect information and to protect systems and servers. So this new backup solution that we have does a lot of that for us. We've had an independent assessment of our cyber posture that says actually we're in a really good position. But generally it's about when rather than if you're targeted in a cyber incident. So yes, we do have a cyber incident response plan that we've tested. Internal Audit did quite a lot of work to help us get that to a really good position. And I think when I reported to this committee about that audit maybe 12 months ago, I said actually we lead the way locally within the South East councils as to our current position on being able to respond to a cyber incident.
Thank you. Should we move to any debate on this point?
Sorry,
Excellent.
Chair.
Oh,
Could I just,
Councillor Becker.
no, can I just issue my apologies? I need to take my children home to bed, so I'm going to leave now. I'm very sorry to leave before the end of my paper, but I do need to get them home.
Thank you. Debate, Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, having asked repeatedly for an update on the incident of November, I must acknowledge the clarity of the report we've received this evening and thank officers for that. It is clear that despite the impression I had gained at the time of the incident that there were problems which were not being it was not possible to handle at the time, but in fact the disaster recovery process worked very smoothly, given the very difficult physical constraints in place. And I think that officers should be commended for handling what was an unusual situation very well. I do know that the fundamentals of our IT infrastructure will prevent most problems arising during a disaster recovery situation because of the automatic failover systems in place. I can recommend a number of specialists from the County Council and elsewhere who will be able to give lengthy instruction on to members on the contents of a cybersecurity plan, having been involved in the county's implement plan, most recent update. It is, however, very complex and one which I would not personally wish to attend. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. I wish to echo all your statements on the report on the IT incident, and I would also sort of stress that when you're in the thick of an IT incident, when you don't know how many days it's going to run, it's much more stressful. So in retrospect, it can seem like it was running smoothly, but we appreciate that it must have been extremely stressful for council officers. You make a good point regarding the cyber attack. I'm not aware of a councillor's briefing on that issue and whether one is necessary for us to have one, or can I ask Liz if that's something which we need to have?
I don't think so, in so much as we have got a cyber incident response plan that our internal audit colleagues have reviewed for us, and although they gave limited assurance at the time, we agreed a number of management actions which has got us to a really good place on that now. So I believe there's a review scheduled for this year, just a light touch to give you the assurance that you need, that officers have that plan in place.
Okay, so we don't need a briefing on what councillors should do in the event of a cyber attack, apart from just trust in officers.
Couple of thousand.
I think it is worth highlighting that education in cyber incidents is just as important as prevention, and we have rolled out recently the training, which was mandatory training for all members and officers in identifying cybersecurity threats, and also some recent campaigns around phishing, just to raise awareness of that. And I think that's a really important area that we will be repeating for members and officers.
Thank you. Any other members wishing to add to the debate? Otherwise, I'll go to the recommendations that we note the content of the report, including the progress of the internal audit management actions, and that's agreed. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. That moves us on to item number 13. Leaving the best till last, it's dispensation requests. Gareth John, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this report follows adoption of the new Code of Conduct on the 1st of January this year. And this report recommends a future process for the handling of dispensation requests received from councillors as a result of the adoption of the new code. And this report basically follows the committee's request at the meeting of the 9th of January 2025 for a proposed procedure to be submitted for consideration. So the proposed procedure, which is set out in Appendix 1 of the report, aims to streamline the process for determining dispensation requests and proposes to delegate authority to the monitoring officer in consultation with the chair of Audit and Governance Committee to grant or refuse dispensations. But it also allows the monitoring officer to refer certain dispensation requests to this committee if required. The procedure also includes a requirement for the monitoring officer to report quarterly to this committee, detailing any dispensations granted or refused during the previous quarter. The recommendation, therefore, is that the procedure which is set out in Appendix 1 on page 290 is approved. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can repeat my initial response to this, because we're unlikely to have any more council elections, by-elections, we're not going to have any new councillors. So my initial reaction was, why do we need this? It's not going to change. And could you explain why this is required?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there is still the possibility of by-elections, which may introduce new members, so that may be required for those reasons. And as we're all aware, local government reorganisation may give rise to scenarios where dispensations might be required. Again, it's not fully clear at this stage in which way that may apply, but yes. That's the main thrust of it, really. And also it makes this process a little bit more agile rather than having to convene a full committee.
Thank you. Any questions from councillors on this innovative efficiency suggestion? Okay, then I shall move to debate. Any debate on this? Councillor Cormoyson, go for it.
I'll just say thank you very much to Mr. John here for coming up with this proposal to try and create a more agile process that doesn't rely on having to convene a meeting at relatively short notice just to give a dispensation, which very likely would be foregone conclusion. But thank you for putting up a process that will hopefully make that easier, certainly easier for us, and hopefully empower you to make those decisions. Thank you.
Yeah, I echo Councillor Cormoyson's statement. So we move to the recommendation that we hereby and forthwith delegate authority to the monitoring officer following consultation with the chair of the Audit and Governance Committee to determine dispensations in accordance with the procedure outlined in Appendix 1. I'll read it all out. This procedure also includes a requirement for the monitoring officer to report quarterly to the Audit and Governance Committee, detailing all dispensations granted or refused during the previous quarter. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. I think this is then the last Audit and Governance meeting of this term. So I thank everyone for their contributions in this meeting and over the year. And I declare this meeting finished. Thank you.